We're in Acts 27 this morning. Details. Off, on. Amazing technology. We're in Acts 27. I think what is so interesting about Acts 27 is with regards to its position, if you will. Acts 27 is if you look at all of Acts, and I'm not saying this is a primary case, but I think it certainly could be given to it, that Acts is the climax point. You've seen the movies, of course. What do you like in the movies when it's raw and tender and warsome and crowds and stress and blah, 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 blah? You always want the hero to come in and rescue somebody. And that's the exciting point. Those movies have action to them. Well, Acts 27 is the climax for Acts. And I think it'll be proven out here in a moment. When you think about what you have seen yourselves with regards to movies that you have, and you can always tell that thrilling point where the music starts playing up to a certain stage. You know what's going to happen there. We have in our head, at least I have in my head, some soundtracks that I'm used to hearing and so on, and for movies that I remember. And it would be good to have that in Acts 27. If we had music to it, because it's something we're probably very used to. It makes Acts with the soundtrack, the scenes start to stand out a little bit more for you maybe. In the Old West movies, it was the trumpet of the cavalry that was charging. You knew that they were on their way to take care of everything and to save the day. In my younger years, it's the Star Wars themes or the Indiana Jones music that's played. Those things, you remember those moments within those scenes of those movies. And I remember watching on TV the fireworks that was over the Potomac River, and the band was playing the Star Spangled Banner on the 4th of July. Or even in younger days than that, on what they called a black and white television set. I remember the famous William Tell Overture, which always meant only one thing, and that was the Lone Ranger was riding in to rescue and to save the day. And he always said exactly the same line, "Hi-O Silver, away." I was very excited watching the Lone Ranger, because you knew at that point that was the major issue of the 30-minute show. He comes in and he's saying that. Well, if Acts had a soundtrack, yes, I had to diverse and think about this for a moment. If Acts had a soundtrack, I know the one that I would put into it. In one particular spot here in Acts, a soundtrack that I think would be slowly starting, and obviously it has to be an ominous type sound that's coming about. Sort of like da-dum. Were you at the same theater where I was? Da-dum, da-dum. And in the background, you can hear the wind is blowing. Da-dum. And the waves are splashing up against and hitting with hurricane force against the ship. And the crew is screaming, and the captain is shouting out orders, and the tension just begins to mount and mount and mount, and all hope is definitely gone, and all of a sudden, there it is. The thrilling point at what was going to happen that music led up to. The human drama at its most dramatic. Well, that's from the movies. But we have in our hands the most dramatic human drama that has ever taken place. We have the Bible. Now think about it for a moment. The Bible contains the most important scenes that you'll ever know about. It contains the most important history that you ever have to really be concerned with. And it contains some of the most important people that our lives depend upon. And God has that in the words given to us. More than any drama that a movie can present to you, more than any drama actually in our own real lives. The scenes, the history, and the people from the Bible. Ever learning more about them and the Bible because we believe in it and we trust it. And therefore, we need to continue to read it, understand it, and pray to our God Almighty. Storms, shipwrecks, and lives are all hanging in the balance in Acts 27. And when we look at that, our eternity with God, our Father, is also always hanging in the balance. Because you decide it every day. You decide the balancing act. God has said, this is what it shall be. And yes, I will forgive you. But you are the one deciding where the balance is going to be. Are you going to be the one that falls off the edge of the world? Or are you going to be the one that will be with the Lord? It's a decision we make all the time, and the Word is right there in front of us. Storms and shipwrecks. Our life in eternity with God our Father literally hangs in the balance. But you know the main reason I like this chapter is because it's not just about how God saved 276 men from the Adriatic Sea and death. It's not just that. This is about how God deals with us right now today. It is telling us history. It's telling us of the people in this history. It's telling us of the scenes that are happening in this history. But we know that God deals with us right now. And I don't know what it is. I don't know what it has been for you. I don't know what it will be for you. But I do know that all of us have storms that are coming. Storms we've had, storms that are present, and yet storms that are coming. And in this lesson in chapter 27, we look at here is not primarily, again, that God delivered these men, but we look at the fact that the lesson we learn from reading the scriptures is that God was looking down upon those men and upon that ship and upon that sea. He was watching it. What we must never forget is we are sitting in this classroom and God is looking down at us right here, right now. He knows what we're thinking. He can feel our pulse happening in the side of our bodies. God never takes his eyes off of us. He is always looking. He is always looking right down upon us. And we're on, if you will, philosophically look at it, we're on this boat called Earth. Because that's where we're sitting. And we even need to believe that God delivers us from all the storms that happen here upon the earth. Now very quickly with this map, because it won't be up throughout the presentation, of course, but you see at the lower right-hand side down here in Caesarea where the boat starts and goes up the Sidon, and then there's the path and so on. And over here to the left, where the white line sort of, that's where all the storm took place. And so this chapter is leading us all the way through this process that you can see here on the map. And just like these men, we begin our lesson, though, this morning with just how they began theirs on the chapter 27. It's a calm day. It hasn't happened yet. So it is calm. And in verse 1 it says, "And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium," that's a seaport on the west coast of Asia. It's not the ship's name. It shows the ship's ownership by that city. The ship was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia. We put to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. And the next day we put in at Sidon. And Julius, the centurion, treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends to be cared for. Interesting. The first way God works in our lives, the first way that God works in our lives in stormy times, and you've experienced it through the storms you've had already, is that he puts the right people in the right place at the right time. Now, those that are oblivious to their storms, now it doesn't turn out so well. But Christians who know God is always there and always watching, looking, and caring, he puts the right people in the right places at the right time. Julius was a man who was put in the right place at the right time for helping Paul. He was kind to Paul. When kindness was exactly what Paul needed, we've talked already in 4 other lessons about what was happening to Paul. And that's a very stressful condition. And he's already spent 2 years in prison in Caesarea, and then he's out onto this boat because he is going to Rome. And he still doesn't know the outcome of Rome's situation for him when he speaks to the emperor, whether or not he'll actually be released or whatever the case is. So it's still a continuous stressful time for him. And in our lives, we realize that when we see that there are stressful times. So it just seems that now they stop at Sidon, and Paul just happens to have friends there. Something else interesting about that. In Sidon, there were friends. You know, you can read the entire Old Testament and New Testament, and you'll never find Sidon. I mean, you'll never find any Christians in Sidon. You'll find no notation of Christians in Sidon. Excuse me, Julius let Paul go when they stopped the ship there at Sidon to go off to his friends, his Christian brethren who were there, to help comfort him and care for him. I've never read anything about Sidon, but I know from whom he was seeing of who they were. Of course, the Scripture does not take us through all the identities of all the locations of all the groups of Christians. No, they're not all found, obviously, within the Bible. But at least one of the reasons he was to see these people was just so Paul could be ministered to by them. Now, there's 2 other men when you're looking at this verse, in verse 3. There are 2 other men that were put there for Paul. And they're both mentioned, actually, step up at verse 2. Matter of fact, look at verse 2 if you have it open there. Let's see, verse 2. Yeah, you see the one mentioned, Luke? Luke was there with Paul. Okay, so all of you looking at verse 2, I guess you want to say there's no mention of Luke. Well, I'm not making it up. It is Luke. Well, how do we know it's Luke? Well, you say, when you look at Luke and you know what Luke has been doing, he has spent as a most trusted friend of Paul for years now. He has been there. He has been around. Have you heard him being mentioned in Jerusalem? Have you heard him being mentioned in Caesarea? No. It is Luke who is there. God put him on this boat to be there with Paul when Paul needed him most. The last person God put in God's life, at least among these men that are on the boat, is a man called Aristarchus. And though Luke was probably on the manifest on the boat because the prisoners all had a manifest, in other words, a listing of who's on the boat. Luke was probably listed as Paul's physician, which would make sense. Don't know that. There's no document to that point. But it would be a logical way to list him. But Aristarchus, not pretty sure. He's mentioned, but we really don't know. And yet he's there for Paul as well. Has God put people in your life? Sure they have. You're sitting against some of the most wonderful people that you have in your life. God puts people into our lives. He certainly has in mine. He certainly has in yours. So you have to take heart, because when the sea gets stormy, then you realize, you look around for the people that God has placed in your life. That's who you turn to. You're turning to God, and you're turning to those who are there with you. And God will not abandon us or leave us alone. He always is looking at us. He is always comforting us, because the storms of life aren't meant to be weathered alone. So you know that yourself. You're thinking right now of situations you've been in and people that you come to count upon, and those you know you could call when that storm hits you. Now, the only problem with these people is it look like they're all walking away from you. But they're walking to the person they're trying to help. And they're helping each other as well. Well, another way God deals with storms is not only to help us and protect us when we are in them, but he also warns us about it. If you look down at verse 7, you'll notice here when it talks about we sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Sindus, and as the wind did not allow us to go further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salome. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fairhaven, near which was the city of Laodicea. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerously, because even the fast was already over. And so here, Paul now looks at those on the boat, and he advises them in saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury because of the storms and everything that is happening as they have coasted so far. And there will be much loss," Paul says, "and not only of the cargo, but of the ship itself and our lives." So Paul makes this announcement to them. He has perceived it. That's how he understands it as he looks at it. Sometimes we're headed for a storm and we don't even see it at all. Don't even see it. We just smack right into it. In this case, God put Paul in their lives to warn them about what was happening. I know you could go and extrapolate all sorts of things you want. Why these people at this time, at this moment, this particular boat in the city, Paul's being brought over there, he's going on. Doesn't matter. The point is, God put Paul in their lives. And at that moment when he put him in their lives, he was able to give them a warning of what was going to happen. The writers of Proverbs say the way of a fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice. Would you have listened to Paul if you were on that ship? Did you hear this guy? He said we're gonna die on this ship. We're gonna die on this ship. It's all gonna be lost. Did you hear this guy? He's got to be crazy. What does he know? I don't think he's a sailor. Think he's ever been on a ship before? I have no idea. The writer of Proverbs says, the way of the fools. Well, how did they know to believe Paul? And why did they automatically not seem to believe Paul, or maybe not seem to want to believe Paul? Maybe it's a lot like we handle things at times. If your life, we are thankful for people who have warned us. I've had lots of warnings. And they weren't the guys that had these blue uniforms and carried a gun and had twirling red lights when they stopped me. No, not those warnings. Warnings about life, what you're doing, why you're doing it, where you're going, and should that be what you should be doing. We're thankful for people who warn us. No, I didn't always listen. But more and more as I moved to a Christian family, I realized very easily and very quickly that I learned to listen to the advice of godly people. There are so many men and Christian women in the congregation from way back on 10th and B downtown when the church was there and so on. If it wasn't for advice that I got from so many of them, I wouldn't be in the path probably that I am right now. God puts these people who are warners. They are warners, and the Bible word is admonishers. But they are people who warn us. You have them in your life, don't you? People who warn you. You learn to listen to them. And when God does that, allows these people to warn us, then we realize that the best thing we can do is to listen to them. And in many cases, what other option do we have at that time? Don't really know. Not even sure I can consciously think of them and be stable at the same time trying to figure out what's going to happen next. Most of the time, however, when we're set on a course of action, the last thing we do want to do is not listen to somebody. We plan this out. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take these 5 steps. Hey, I got it all. No, that's okay. I got it all figured out. Fine. If you think I'm wrong, well, then we'll just deal with it later. But this is the course I'm taking. We don't want, when we have everything figured out in our mind, someone else actually going in and telling us, do this, do that. I'm not so sure about step 3. Hey, step 3 is the main point of why I'm doing step 1 and 2, followed up by step 4 and 5. We don't like the advice. So why do you expect this crew to listen to Paul? They didn't. They ignored him. Who is that guy? They ignored Paul. Look at verse 11. But the centurion, that's Julius, paid more attention to the pilot, driver of the boat, and the owner of the ship than what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority, notice that word majority, it's going to haunt the Bible. The majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, the harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Well, the centurion made 2 obvious mistakes. We're looking at this after the fact, but he made 2 obvious mistakes. The first is in verse 11, we've read, in which he followed the advice of the experts rather than following the advice of God. Where did he get the advice from God? Paul, that guy over there. And the second thing was, he followed majority rule. You remember the first major crisis of majority rule? Majority rule. You know how dangerous that is? 12 men went out of the land of Canaan to spy it out. 10 came back and they all said, there are giants in this land and we're just a bunch of little grasshoppers compared to them. There is absolutely no way we can beat them. All 10 of the 12 said that, but Caleb and Joshua, they had a different report. Do you really expect that it's advice that we are giving, or do you think it's something due us that the elders should come up and stand up here and say, by the way, we want to take a vote. Here's item 1. Here's item 4. Here's item 6. Majority rules. The men are there to do that position of which God wants them to do. The experts. Doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. Doesn't mean they do everything perfectly. If that was the case, we wouldn't have any elders, because no man fits that category. But nevertheless, we realize that they are put there for that task. No majority rule. They looked at the land, Caleb and Joshua, and instead of giant warriors, what did they see? They saw a mighty God. They saw a mighty God who could do anything. Look back over the history of the Israelites. Just take their history, chunk, 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 and look at all of the disasters of the Israelites. It's like they just could never make it. All the disasters. Because the majority rule. If you look and analyze the disasters, it's because majority ruled. They didn't listen to God. They didn't listen to the leaders. Over and over, we find that the prophets alone are hated by the very people that they were sent to speak to. Probably the most riskiest job to do in the Old Testament is to say, I'll go talk to them. You're risking everything when you do that, because those are the ones who get destroyed. The majority don't want to listen to you. Excuse me, today, if we asked everybody on this planet Earth to scream out how many are in the Lord's care, comfort, and belief, do you think you can hear the whisper? Do you think you can hear them whisper? Because the majority on this planet cares absolutely nothing about a God. Any God. Anybody's God. Nothing. Majority, no. No. Majority wasn't willing to listen to God's message. Take a look at verse 14. But soon a tempest wind called the nor'easter struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Now skip quickly down to verse 18. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo, and on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. You realize they went through numerous things as you read the different passages there. They would put out two drag anchors in the back and so on to do the normal process of what you do to save the ship from being sunken. And yet, when the storm hits and your life is thrown upside down, that's when we start thinking about really what's important, don't we? You're hit, and they take you into the hospital. Not sure everything that's wrong with you, but you're conscious enough to know that's where you are. But you really don't know what's happening to you. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know. One brother that I had the blessing from God to be close to for years, and I remember because I was very, very upset about going to the hospital and talking to brethren. I mean, I've seen them standing and walking and shaking hands and hugging together and so on, but they're, no. I don't know. He said, you come. You go into the room so far. If you don't want to go all the way, that's fine. But that's our brother and sister. We need to comfort them. Ooh. That's what these Sidon people did, right? They comforted Paul. I don't know how many times I barely got in. I don't know how many times I would get close to the door and I say, brother, I'll wait for you here. And then I finally got on. And then I finally would go in. And finally, after a number of years, Still very scary to me all the time, I guess. Realizing that God is looking over at us all, I realize that this brother is not expected to live. And I'm there with my brother, and I hear the comforting that he is doing. And I learned that. I learned that. Some years go by, we moved. Some years go by, and then come back. And my brother was in the hospital. They didn't know what was really wrong with him. And I wanted to go, and I did. And when I went in, I was surprised. Because in the other times, as he would take me in, and I was listening to the brothers or the sisters, and they're talking about their panic or their fear, and life is going to be ebbing out from them. For those that were so seriously that the people didn't know what was going to be happening with them. And I found that brother in exactly the same position. Exactly. He looked at me and says, I don't want to go. Whoa. Whoa. I don't want to go. He didn't. But you see the whole circle that happened? From comforting and caring for each other to the most climactic situation you can have with someone. And then to see those who taught you go through some of the very same things that you were there learning about. Makes me think, how am I going to be when I'm lying there? So, the storm hits and your life is thrown upside down. That's when we start thinking about what's really important, isn't it? That's what's really important then. Sometimes we need to clear the deck because we got too much stuff cluttered around. Now, I'm not going to take you downstairs in my house. I've got this desk and a little file cabinet and so on. It is Cluttersville, but I have the absolutely wife-approved response. Dear, I know where everything is. How could you find anything in here? Look, the stack here. Well, these stacks all on the floor. Well, that's the paper. Well, what about this over here? And these books, are you going to put them back on the... It's not clutter to me. I'm in complete control of it. Well, it's in complete control of me. But nevertheless, we're a working relationship. Clutter and me. You got clutter. Yeah, clutter everywhere. We all have clutter somewhere. And so when we look at that, we realize sometimes we need to clear the decks. Need to get rid of that clutter in our life. It's got unimportant things there, got things that should have never been put there in the first place. You just got to clean up your life so you're ready to do God's work. So you can continue to keep doing God's work. The clutter that happens to us. Well, and God has used storms to our life to help us clear the decks. Well, verse 20 is a pretty good description of how they felt about then. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. You got it there, right? Very simple. There's the word, straight and forward. They gave up. They gave up. They quit. Couldn't do any more. The sun's disappeared. No stars are being seen anywhere. They're in the water. They're on the ship. There's no small tempest, they're saying, laying there on us. It's a large one, and all hope has been given up. And when all hope is lost in a man, he has abandoned. He has quit. Verse 20 is probably one of the saddest verses in all of the Bible. One of the saddest verses. I gave up. I quit. It's sad whenever people give up hope. And it's sad when the night gets dark and we give up. I have given up before. I'm sure there's a number out here who have given up before. And you know what the strength of giving up is? It's one of the best things you can do. Give it up. Quit. They felt abandoned because they weren't depending upon God. They were depending upon what they were doing, what they could make happen to the ship, what they could do. That's where they spent all the time getting do this, handle this, throw this away, balance it up. We'll make it through this storm. We've been in other storms before. We're going to make it through this storm here. And they gave up. They abandoned this storm. This storm took them out, if you will. And it's at that point in our lives when we give up that we turn over to God. We turn over to God. Neither sun nor stars appear for many days, and that's when the angel, God sends an angel. He sends an angel. He could have sent an angel at any time. He could have sent it the week before the trip even started out. He could have said something to Paul, for example, like, I tell you what, you're going to be going on this trip. You're going to have some problems, but don't worry about it. He didn't do that. He didn't send an angel to say anything about that. Here it is. He could have, Paul, before ever stepped on the boat, hey, you're going to have a shipwreck. But it didn't send him a week before. He waited until they all gave up hope of being saved by themselves. You see, they did everything they could. They trimmed the sails, they dumped the cargo, they cleared the decks. I already mentioned that. They did everything they could do, everything they knew how to do. And it wasn't until they exhausted all of their ingenuity and all of their talents and all of their resources and all of their abilities, it is at that point that God said, all right, I'm going to save you. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and to whom I worship. Paul told the men about the angel. And Paul told them they were going to be saved. And then Paul made the definitive statement of chapter 27. The definitive statement in chapter 27 is verse 25. Paul said, so take heart. For I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. He believes in God. He believes what he was told. He told him about what happened. So, are we ready for the storm when it comes? I didn't say if it comes. I said when it comes. Are we ready for that when it comes again? Are we going to know what to go through in the storms that are hitting us within our lives? And when they come, I hope to trim the sails. I'm going to work at it. I hope to dump the cargo. I hope to clear the decks. I hope to do everything humanly possible to deal with a storm. Everything that is humanly possible that I can do in this storm that's in my life, I will do. And then, I hope to give up and turn all that I know to God. To pray to God to deliver me from the storm, whatever that means. And then believe that God will fulfill his promise to me and the promise to you to deliver you from the storm, just as he did Paul, just as the example shows me, just as I know it to be. 60 seconds. It's 60 seconds, and it has audio.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, 60-second spot on time. Can I have a clock in the corner?
It's there.
Thank you. Roll them.
Rolling.
Action.
Okay, here's the deal. We all know that life is busy. There aren't enough hours in the day to do all the things that we want and need to do. In fact, you're probably thinking of all the things you need to do next week right now, wondering how you're going to squeeze it all in. But the fact is, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, no matter how much is on your plate, we all have the same gift of 24 hours each day. It's 24 hours, 1,440 minutes, 86,400 seconds. All the money in the world won't let you buy one single second more than the next guy. And once that second is gone, it's gone forever. Look, there goes one right now. Another one, gone. You'd think that we would judiciously use such a limited and valuable gift. You'd think that we would choose wisely how to spend, no, invest our time. But do we? Really? And after taking the time for eating and sleeping and all the other basic necessities, do we really use this gift the way we should? Think of all the great things you could do in 24 hours, all the lives you could touch, all the significant changes that could be made in your life and others. The fact is, you could actually make a difference in this world in 24 hours. Or not. So, how are you investing your
time?
Thank you. Good morning.